Hey folks, welcome back. My name is Cyrus Davis, and today I have three wonderful guests with me, three great Canadian players joining me for this Toronto Regionals Metaforecast. We're going to start with intros, so everyone just go ahead and introduce yourself. We'll start with Austin.
Hey, I'm Austin. I am American and Canadian. Honorary Canadian.
Okay.
Hi, I am Jackson. I'm from the Toronto area, downtown.
And I'm Nolan Randall, newer player to the competitive scene. I'm from the GTA area as well.
All right. These players are all very humble. No one wants to brag. All three of these players have top 8 in major events this season, all very accomplished and looking to continue to secure some more great finishes at Toronto and hopefully lock up their top 125 invites. So, but let's go right into the questions here. I'm going to start off with the most obvious deck. After not making top 8 at Stuttgart, will Regidrago still be the most popular deck at Toronto? And even whether it will or not, what will be the most popular deck outside of Regidrago? We'll start with Austin again for the first question here.
I actually think that Drago will still be the most popular deck. I think that its lead above other decks is probably going to be a little more leveled compared to because it used to be like a spike, number one 50%, and the next one was 12, and then but I think it'll be a little bit more even. But I still think it'll be either the most or probably second most played deck.
Okay, and what do you think after Drago will be the most popular, the next most popular deck?
Popular. In this meta right now, I'd have to say probably the cloth deck right now has been getting the most hype. It's kind of crazy. I don't know about actual popular playability, but I think that most people are going to be expecting that to be the most splash deck that will do well.
Yeah, maybe if not in day one, then in day two we'll see that convert to the second most popular. All right, Jackson.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that Drago's number one, but I don't think Drago's going to see more play. I think it's more fueled by Raging Bolt seeing less play. So you probably still have around 13% Drago, but Raging Bolt's no longer a 16% deck. It's probably a 10% deck. And I would expect Charizard probably to be number two in play, around 12%. It's first and second at Stuttgart, and it's a good deck.
Yeah, I echo Jackson's thoughts there. I was going to say 13% as well for Drago. I think Bolt kind of fallen off the past few events, and it has not really seen any major results and finishes. So I think it's really going to just drop off, and people are going to be switching to Cloth and Rhydon instead. But I think I probably would say Drago first, and then Zard second, and then third, probably really close, but maybe Cloth.
Yeah, I think I'm relatively in agreement with a bit of everyone here. I think that I don't agree with Austin that I think Drago is going to level out a bit more. I feel like the past few events, the highest it even has been is 14%. So I feel like it will level down to maybe around 11% ish. But I do think that Zard is going to be the second most popular, probably pretty close. And then I agree with Nolan that I think, and Austin that I think Bolt is going to be record low. It's not going to be anything extreme, but it's been above 10% pretty consistently for months. So I think it's going to be below 10.
Cloth is crazy. I don't think Cloth's going to be in the top 3. I think it's maybe 6-7%. So if you're in 10%, it's actually crazy.
I think it will probably be around 7, but I think the format's just so diverse right now that I don't expect that many decks to actually be above 7%. I think that Zard will be the second most popular. Bolt will probably be third, but I could see it dipping just below 7%. But it'll probably be 7 or 8 still. So I just think that Cloth is definitely going to be up there. And I think that the Cloth will most likely, if I had to guess, be the second most popular deck in day 2, at least. Given just the 50% conversion rate at Stuttgart. All right, and speaking of Cloth, with Goldango and Cloth, they're both less meta-defining decks, relatively speaking. But after moderate success at Sacramento, both converted that to huge success at Stuttgart with top 8 finishes, and Cloth also persisted in getting some top 8 finishes in a second place at Perth. Will we see these decks continue to climb upwards? We kind of answered that with Cloth a little bit already. But will we continue to see the success, or have they sort of reached their peak and might even stifle off at this point? We'll start with Nolan for this one.
Yeah, I think as we mentioned, Cloth is a really strong deck in this format. Success in Stuttgart. I think Golden Go is one of those decks that seems to make a cut at every event, but there seems to be one player that does very well with the deck, and we don't see a lot of the same domination in day 2 that we do with other decks. So I think Golden Go will continue to have some varied success in few numbers. Cloth, I think, will continue to have that more dominating success and take up a lot of spots in day 2.
All right, and we'll go reverse order this time, so we'll go Jackson next.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of that. I do think Goldango is a little fake. I think that it's definitely a little bit overrated than where I would put it. It's a very, very fun deck, which means that a lot of less experienced players play it, so it's naturally going to have a lower conversion rate, just kind of from like the same fallacy that Raging Bolt has. So I would expect it to convert particularly well. Cloth, on the other hand, a lot of really good players played it to Stuttgart, which is partially responsible for that 50% conversion rate. So I don't think it'll be quite as high, but I would expect, an above average conversion rate.
And Austin?
Yeah, I think the Cloth is mostly kind of leveled off right now. Like, I think it'll be about the same from Stuttgart. It's a very good deck. Goldango, I've seen a lot of people starting to pick it up lately, especially in the local area that I'm in. Like, a lot of people are starting to pick it up and just play it. A lot of people are saying they're considering it for Toronto. I don't think it's going to convert very well, but I think the few people that will convert will probably end up doing pretty well with it, just because they know what the deck does and they can play it pretty well. Cloth, I think, that has the potential to convert pretty well, just because I think that some people aren't respecting it enough.
Yeah,
They're gonna go like one bench Pokemon and just not bench the second
agree
one.
with that. I think that Cloth expected to convert very well. I think that I expect 2 Cloth in top 8, like we saw at Perth. Although obviously Perth is a 318 player major, but I expect 2 Cloth in top 8. I think the deck is like super well positioned. I think that I 100% agree that Goldango is like mostly a fake deck. I also think that like it seems, there's generally speaking, that there are better Goldango players in Europe in general. I mean, Antoine and I think it was Owen Cameron was the other top 8 finisher, right? So like both of those players are very accomplished. Like they're both very experienced players who decide to play Goldango. I think that has more to do with their top 8 than Goldango being a deck worthy of top 8. I think it was Victor De Velasco who made top 8 at Sacramento, who's also a very solid player. So I'm not a huge Goldango believer, and I also don't think that there's a lot of North American players. There's not a lot of good North American players that I know that I think would play Goldango to a regional. So
100%.
Yeah, no, I think most top players going to be on Drago again. It's what we've seen the last 4 regionals. And
they're going to Drago and Charizard.
For the 5th regional of like a very similar format, and no one's just randomly jumping ship.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so Lugia and Terapagos, the Pidgeot builds with Dusknoir specifically, were both missing from top 8 at both Sacramento, Stuttgart, and Perth. But obviously, these decks I think are very respected still by the general community. Do they still have a place in the metagame, or are people just not playing them, or are they just not super well positioned right now? We'll start with Jackson this time.
Okay, so I actually disagree with the fact that Lugia is like a respected deck. I think Lugia is like the most disrespected deck of all time. I would expect Lugia to be very, very disrespected into this event. A lot of people played Temple Sinnoh these last 2 weekends, and sort of how that cycle works is people will take out their Temples of Sinnoh for this week, and then they'll put them in next week. So I think this is kind of like the part of the cycle where people are taking out Temples. Terapagos specifically is, I think, fairly well respected. I probably won't see a ton of play, 3-4%, but the players that play it will, generally speaking, be very, very strong.
Yeah, that's fair. And we'll go Austin next this time. We'll end with Nolan.
Yeah, Lugia, I think, definitely is falling off. It's just not as consistent as people like, and I think people are finally realizing that. It just doesn't do the thing that you want it to do all the time, and then you dead draw, you research away 6 energy, and it just feels bad. So I don't really think that it's going to have a place in the metagame for Toronto, at least. Tropicus, I think, still has solid matchups across the board. It still just has the bad matchups to Goldango and Zard. But there are lines you can play with it. Like, if you're a better player than the other guy, you can usually figure out what you're supposed to do. And I think that they definitely have a spot. Like, if any of them make top 8, it'll be like a good player is playing it and can actually pilot it correctly, that kind of thing.
Yep. Nolan?
I have a bit of a different thought. I do think Lugia has its spot in the meta right now, just because decks like Drago are cutting like Temple of Sinnohs and such, which puts itself into a much better position in the metagame. But I think Dropagos really has fallen off, gained bad matchups in the Golden Go deck. Lost Box also is a really tough matchup for that now with the Pikachu edition, and we actually saw 0 Trapagos make day 2 in most regional Perth. So not even having a single day 2, I don't really see it making a run for any like finishes or top 8s this turn.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think both decks are honestly solid. I think that the Drago matchup has scared off a lot of Trapgos players, and I don't think that the Drago matchup's honestly even that bad. I think that it's very fairly winnable for Trapgos. If not, like even. But I think that the propaganda is that Trapgos gets farmed by Drago, and so people have just sort of accepted that and stopped playing it. I don't necessarily 100% agree that like people are just gonna not be playing like Temple of Sinnohs. I think that like obviously I'm not you guys aren't saying that no one's gonna be playing, but I think that most people are still going to copy like are just gonna net deck Regidrago list and just keep the Temple in to be safe. But I do think the Lugia is dropping. Jackson, did you have a comment on it?
Yeah, I was gonna say like the Trapagos matchup with Drago is a little bit tougher because of Executor. I know a lot of people have Executor, which limits your ability to keep 2 Terras in play because they now just have a button that says take 2 prizes.
Yeah.
So that does limit some of your ability to like play like cards like Bouffalance. Like I don't think the Bouffalance are actually good in the deck. I know that Austin doesn't like the Bouffalance regardless, but I think they're even worse to where they were prior to like LAIC format when some of the people were kind of saying that Bouffalance were good for that matchup.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I also think that on the same note, a lot more Regidrago players are playing the Hackers as well, which can also be a slight edge in the matchup for just a slight increase in the matchup for Drago, being able to easily one-shot the Trapagos. That definitely has an impact as well. But we'll go ahead on to the next question here. So Gardevoir EX made a very interesting list, made top 8 at Stuttgart with Call Bells and Precious Trolley that I tried on the stream the other day and I wasn't a huge fan of. But it did follow up that top 8 by winning with another top 8 and a win at Perth Regionals by a couple of Japanese players playing a more traditional Guardy list to that we would have seen a few months ago or Worlds format. Will that bring more popularity to Gardevoir EX heading into Toronto, or is that mostly a negligible finish just because Perth is so much smaller and people don't respect Australian events as much typically? We'll start with Jackson this time, and then we'll go Nolan and then Austin.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, I actually think Slow Guardy is much better positioned than it had been previously. Part of the adoption for that, like, Turbo Guardy that Henry Chow made was the Trapagos and Palkia matchups. Palkia is pretty much non-existent anymore. I don't even know if it'll be, like, a 2% deck. And then Trapagos, as we said, is also kind of falling off. So when you take away a lot of those aggressive Dusknoir decks, playing the Slow Guardy actually does make a lot more sense. Another reason for Slow Guardy is that it has a better Charizard matchup if you play the Devo typically. I know the list that one did not play the Devo, but a lot of people that play this type of archetype are big fans of that card. And so you take a little bit of a worse matchup into Drago, but the rest of your spread is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Jackson just said there. The Slow Guardy, the reason we pivoted away from it was these aggro Dusknoir decks that came around. So with that kind of fading to the background, the Slow Guardy emerged as probably the better choice between the two. I think Devo is definitely something you want to include with the popularity of Zard going into this weekend, I think. And I think it will continue to see success. And there's a lot of good Gardevoir players in the area, and I think people will be bringing it to Toronto.
Yeah, Austin?
I'm kind of on the dichotomy of it where I'm like, I know a lot of people personally that would say it is very negligible just because they don't respect Australia. But I know that the smart players will respect it, and I think that people will actually be a little more invigorated to play it just because there are lists that are doing well. And, even being, only a 300-person event, you still play a similar amount of rounds. You still play a similar, caliber of players once you're in day 2 and top 8 and all that. I think that it has the chance to do really well here, too. Yeah, definitely have to play Devo. Charizard is, way too much of a threat. If you don't play Devo, you're basically going to lose. And yeah, I think that it's gonna I think me personally, I think it'll increase its popularity just because people will finally kind of get that that kind of backing up of their opinion. They're like, I think Guardy's good, and then it's okay, it won, so now I think it's good. You get a lot of their friends that are told you,
Yeah, I told you it's good. I think Nolan made a really good point too about in Canada we have a lot of really good Gardevoir players, a lot of players who just love playing Guardy. So I think that if they can play Guardy, there are a lot of players who will be biased towards playing it. I don't necessarily agree that the slow Guardy build is the way to go. I think that, I don't know, to me, your Drago matchup is just so much worse than with the Turbo Guardy build, that I think the Turbo Guardy build is still the way to go. But especially with the Devo, you certainly do have a much better Charizard matchup with the slow Guardy build. I would also say that I think that a lot of Zard lists aren't playing Vacuum, including, I believe, the list that once Duke didn't play Vacuum. So I think that does factor in as well to if you wanted to play the Turbo Guardy build, I think that your Charizard matchup isn't that bad with them not playing if they don't play Vacuum.
I actually think if they don't play Vacuum, you're just favored into Charizard.
Yeah.
There's not really a ton of things that you can do. The prize trade is just really bad for you, and you have to just stack really big turns off of Ionos with Tomb in play. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Okay, so getting into sort of what you guys are thinking for Toronto, what are 2 decks that you will absolutely not take an unfavorable matchup to going into Toronto? We will start with Austin, and then Nolan, and then Jackson.
I will not take a deck that has an unfavorable matchup to Raging Bolt. I know Drago is best deck of format, but I do not want to play it because you're still going to get the Pokédad that's hey, this is my first regional, and then you lose to him because it's just the matchup is still just unfavored.
Yeah,
I will play a deck that beats Raging Bolt at least, and it would be embarrassing to lose to that. I think I also don't want to play a deck that loses to Stall or any kind of control. At least has a 50-50 to it, just because a lot of people are hyping Snorlax for this event too, because of the rise of Charizard, and because all these other decks are just cutting their switch cards and their Pekarons and stuff for switch cards, which I don't really understand. And it has a good matchup to Cloth, it has a good matchup to the Dango, it has a good matchup to a whole bunch of things. So I don't really want to play anything that loses to Lax because it's been getting a lot of hype.
Yeah, that's fair. Nolan.
A bit of a different thought here. If I had to pick 2 decks to not take a unfavorable matchup into, they'd definitely be Drago and Zard, just because I think those are going to be the most popular decks in day 1 and probably likely top 3 most popular in day 2. But I think the meta is just in a place where it's so wide, you're going to have a bad matchup into something, and it's going to be a relevant deck, and you might hit it once or twice. So I think it's a meta where you could take it unfavorable into one of the top decks and be fine with it. So my answer would be there's not a single deck would necessarily put down a deck loses to
no deal breakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with that logic. I'm pretty much locked into playing Charizard for this event already, and I know that Regidrago is going to be the most played deck, but it's such a wide format that it just doesn't really matter. I don't really think losing to any individual or even 2 individual decks is too relevant. You would rather just play a more consistent deck that beats, the 90% of the format, rather than teching or playing a deck just to specifically beat one deck. If I was going to tech for anything, though, it would probably be control, because a lot of decks can play one card and turn that matchup from like a 30-70 to 60-40 to even better, depending on what your deck is and what you're teching.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that like although I agree that like generally speaking the meta is so diverse that you can afford to take a loss to anything. I also think that like as far as winning the tournament goes, like in day 2 the percentage of Regidrago is likely to be significantly higher than the percentage of Regidrago in day 1. So I definitely am not gonna personally I'm not gonna play a deck that's unfavored into Drago. Just for that reason that like if I make day 2 I feel like I'm gonna hit way more Drago. Or at least let's say if you want to like come first, like if you can make top 8, you're gonna hit at least one Drago almost definitely, in my opinion. And then I agree with actually Snorlax being another deck that I probably wouldn't take the loss to, for the same reasons that Jackson said, of just like it's pretty easy to fit cards into your deck to beat Lax. So I think that is worth doing, just because Snorlax is very, very well positioned. But generally, I agree with the sentiment of you can always take a bad matchup to something. I've played decks that had bad matchups into the most popular deck in the room many times, and I think that generally speaking, like people focus too much on like I don't want to take a loss to the most popular deck in the room, which is about 12%, but in order to not take a loss to that, they play a deck that takes a bad matchup into like 3-5% deck. So it's like, okay, well, you're taking a bad matchup to 15% of the field in order to take a good matchup to 11% of the field. All right, what is the most underrated deck going into Toronto? We will start with Nolan, then Austin, then Jackson.
Don't really have any one deck that I think is like super under the radar. It's gonna catch everybody by surprise. I feel like that's already happened a few times this format already, with decks like Miraidon and Cloth Tropicals coming out of the woodworks, it seems. I think Lugia might do pretty well. That'd be where my money is, on a deck that people do well.
Aren't really respecting enough, yeah. All right, Austin.
Gotta get a shout out to my boy Tropicos. We were hating on him, the first like couple questions there. The thing is about it, like it has good matchups into like 60 or 70% of the meta, and like I mean like favorable matchups. So like you take the loss to Drago, Charizard, and all that, and you don't even really take the loss to it. Sometimes you can just outspeed them if you go first and win the coin flip. Those kinds of like weird, like various things. But I think that it is super underrated because it didn't top 8 Perth, and it didn't get any day 2s. Was that right?
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Yeah, you get a single day 2. That's so funny.
Oh, I see one.
Dude, that's so funny. I'm just like, I think that it has good matchups into like a lot of the meta still. And you just like kind of blow up your opponent. If people are going to play Gardevoir, then it has good matchups in Gardy. And specifically, I'm talking about Dusknoir, not Cloth. The Dusknoir Tropicos. Yeah. Just clarifying that.
So I think that I don't know how underrated it is anymore, but we haven't mentioned it. I think that Dragapult Thorns deck is very legitimate. I played a few games with it, and the Precious Trolley actually makes this deck work. I know you're shaking your head, Austin, but I think the deck is pretty legitimate. It's I know that online right now there's been like a ton of tournaments where it's had like 2 or 3 spots in the top 8. So I'm not sure how under the radar it is anymore, but you do have like surprisingly good matchups into quite a few things. And I think the Toadstool card is actually just a broken card. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that one have like multiple spots in day 2.
This is like one more good matchup for Tropicos, though.
Yeah, man. Just cut the vitality band. I promise that you don't need it.
Yeah, I can't say that I respect Dragapult Thorns too much either, but I also haven't tried it enough to say that I can disprove what you're saying. I think that the most underrated deck right now, honestly, there's a part of me that just wants to say Cloth, because even though I think it is very highly rated, but I think it's still not highly rated enough. I think the deck is like actually very like kind of insane. But I think I'm gonna go with Lugia as well. I think that Lugia is very, very disrespected right now, and I think that it's pretty well positioned. I think that it'll do fine at Toronto, especially players that have played all the time. I think we have our local Sam who has made day 2 at I think every event so far.
Every NA event.
Yeah, every NA event so far, and then Rahul, obviously, very very good Lugia player who will likely play Lugia again, and Kieran Farah. Who knows? But I think that there's a good chance that he'll play Lugia again and do very well with it again. So, all right. Which meta deck would you highly suggest against playing in Toronto, and why? So we'll start with Austin and then go Jackson, Nolan.
So I know we said it's a meme deck, but it is legit. I wouldn't suggest not playing Goldango. It is. I played 3 games with it because I was like, okay, let's see what the hype is about, and it is so inconsistent. I don't understand how people win with that. It's so inconsistent. It's you draw would you draw a lot of cards? If you get there, it's fine, but getting there is the hard part. It just doesn't really do the thing very often. You draw a hand of like Night Stretcher, 4 Superior, and then a Pokestop, and then you Pokestop away 3 Irida, and you're like, what the hell am I playing? Or whatever you. Yeah.
Why am I here?
It's a little extreme.
It feels so bad.
I agree that Goldango is pretty bad, but I actually played Miraidon to a cup this last weekend, and I think that it's probably one of the worst picks for this event. The thing is that now that Miraidon's on the radar, a lot of people just know how to play against it. So, we saw on stream just people throwing against it all the time. I remember watching John's game against, I think it was Kenneth in top 8, and he just didn't bench the Kyurem and ended up losing because of that. So, small things like that, people just aren't going to make those mistakes anymore. And on top of that, it's still a Miraidon deck where you have 16, 17 energies. And then, things like people just overbenching against Raikou. That Goldango matchup is not nearly as good as people say it is, because the second that they underbench, you can't one-shot a Goldango with Raikou, and your plan kind of just goes to shambles. You have a lot of matchups like that where once people know what's going on, the deck loses a lot of percentage points.
If I had to pick a deck not to play, probably just go with Ancient Box. I know people have been kind of seeing a little bit of resurgence with it. I think it's just a bad deck. I don't know. I wouldn't touch that deck. I think Charizard's gonna be really popular. I think you're gonna get smacked around by Charizard.
Yeah, I know we've both felt like there are times where the Ancient Box's matchup spread was so good that it defied how bad of a deck Ancient Box was and made it playable. But I do not think that right now is one of those times, especially with Charizard. Just come finals mirror at a major tournament. That being said, I'm gonna say I was gonna say Raging Bolt because I think Raging Bolt's terrible. But it's if that's what you like playing, I think that there are people who should play Raging Bolt just because they're comfortable with it. So I'm gonna say Roaring Moon. Obviously that's not the at the top of the tier list right now, but it seems to keep seeing play and decent amounts of play, 4 to 5% at every tournament, and people need to stop playing Roaring Moon because I think it's just not good right now at all. It does not beat there's very few decks that it beats consistently at all. I don't even think Drago was the matchup that it was really targeting at Worlds, and why it did super well at Worlds. I don't even think it beats Drago consistently at all. So people should definitely stop playing Roaring Moon.
Well, it has the same fallacy as Dawn that I was talking about, where people just figure out how to play against it, and it just loses so many percentage points.
Yeah,
I actually think that Raging Bolt's by far the best turbo deck to play for this event. Roaring Moon and Miraidon just have very exploitable weaknesses, and Raging Bolt at least does consistent numbers, and it does Austin was saying with Goldango, at least it does the thing, right? It does what it wants to do pretty consistently.
Yeah, and Raging Bolt is so good at it is. If you're hit a bad matchup and your opponent does stumble, they don't get they don't draw well, they draw pretty awkwardly. Even against Zard, you just win. You can just all of a sudden you're just winning because your opponent missed a couple of turns of attacks.
Yep, I fully agree. I've played Charizard and Snorlax to enough events and lost to Raging Bolt enough times that the deck's good enough. It does what it wants to do.
Yeah, it's I can trash on it all I want, but I seem to still lose to it here and there with decks that I feel I should beat it with all the time. So, all right, and our last question for the day: what is the best deck that you won't be playing in Toronto, and why won't you be playing it? and we will go Nolan, then Jackson, then Austin.
The best deck for Toronto I won't be playing will be probably Snorlax. I think it's one of the better decks, better position decks that I won't be playing. Just I do not enjoy this style of gameplay, and I don't want to buy these games. I think it's a bit on the radar, so I think some people will be checking for it, and I don't think it will go far in day 2.
All right.
So for me, it's Regidrago. I think Regidrago is by far the best deck in the format. I think it's the best deck to play for pretty much any event in this format. The only reason why I'm not playing it is because I'm not competent enough on it. I don't want to be playing against the best players in the world on a deck that I don't feel 100% confident in the mirror match. So for that reason, I won't be playing it.
And Austin?
Jackson literally took the words out of my mouth. Like, it is a little hard to play sometimes, and when I play it, it's just you whiff the one card you needed to get in the discard, like the one dragon you needed in the discard pile. You whiff the energy switch. You're like, cool, I drew 20 cards this turn, and then I V-starred, and I still whiff the energy switch, or just like whatever card you needed. And I just do not feel confident enough to play the deck. Like, mirror match sounds awful. Mirror match sounds terrible. Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think that I want to say Regidrago as well, because I almost definitely, like, there's like a 99% chance I won't be playing it, and I do think it is probably the best deck in the format. But I'd say there is a 1% chance I'll play it. So I'll go with Charizard, which there is a 100% chance I won't be playing. I think that Charizard is super, super good. I think that it can beat anything. I think that it's like fairly consistent, and it has it has good matchups. I think that like there aren't any matchups as Charizard that I don't feel like I can win if there's a skill gap between my opponent and I. I feel like if my opponent isn't as skilled of a player as I am, I pretty much always feel favored with Charizard. So that like is a big selling point for me when going in. Especially if I just am like wanted to get safe points. All right.
That's actually crazy that you said that. I wanted to just like one more point is that like whenever I'm playing Charizard against Drago, I might be against like the worst player in the world, and I'm still like absolutely like quaking as the opponent as I'm calling the flip, because if I go second in that matchup and they draw hot, there's just like absolutely nothing that can be done. Like if they get like turn 2 Dragapult going first without using their V-Star, like 90% of those games are like almost unwinnable. So
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that mid Regidrago players even get the turn 2 attack consistently enough. They
just gotta research and squawk and pray.
They fumble. All right. Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for joining me at a good time, and I hope we provided everyone watching some valuable insight. We will go ahead and you guys can plug whatever you want to plug, give some shoutouts, and we'll go in the order that we introduce ourselves in. So Austin, and then Jackson, and then Nolan.
If you're in Canada, shop at darkfoxtcg.com. Major plug.
A shout out to Banana Games. That's my sponsor, located in downtown Toronto. If you're in Toronto early this weekend, we do have League tomorrow night, so feel free to come by if you have the chance. And shout out to the entire team there. Shout out to pretty much everyone that's been working with me for this regional for Toronto. I will be playing Charizard, so if you want to come up and say hi, please do. I'm more than happy to meet anyone.
No, I don't really have any shoutouts on my end, but I'll be at Toronto, so yeah, same thing. If you want to come up, say hi. Always happy to meet new people. So see you there.
And I'll shout out to my sponsor TSS, and if you want to check out any of my other content or my socials, links to everything will be in the description below. I also coach on Metafy, and I know that Jackson also coaches on Metafy, so I'll plug that for Jackson here. And everyone's if you want to find any of these fantastic players and follow them on socials, I will include a link to their Twitter accounts in the description below as well. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a great evening.